Oi, boa tarde. Gente, estou muito feliz hoje de poder apresentar para vocês uma que eu considero grande amiga minha, rabina linda Motzkin. Ela, no momento, se encontra na Califórnia, ela vive em Saratoga, trabalha no Temple Sinai, junto com o marido Jonathan Rubinstein, desde 1986. A rabina linda se formou na Hebrew Union College, em Cincinnati. Junto com o marido, ela tem um projeto que ela trabalha também com o Bread and Torah Project, que baseado com o Scribble and Bakery, em Assá, né, elas fazem atividades. Ela está liderando, o que ela vai falar para a gente hoje é sobre um outro projeto que ela lidera, que é o Community Torah Project. Ela vai falar bastante, seria o projeto comunitário de Torá, de escrita de Torá, de preparar uma Torá. Ela também é autora de 4 livros de hebraico, um Aleph isn't taught, Aleph isn't enough, Beit for Bereshit e Taf is for Torah. Ela é coautora também de um outro livro de hebraico e é mãe orgulhosa da Ruchi Sofia, do Ari Shalom e da Shira Beracha. Ela hoje vai falar para a gente de todos os projetos, vai conversar em inglês e eu espero que ela vai falar devagarzinho e eu espero que no final vocês tenham as perguntas e possam conversar com ela e conhecer essa pessoa que é linda por dentro e por fora e tem projetos maravilhosos. Linda, so if I forgot something, I hope you understood how I introduced you, and if I forgot something, you can introduce yourself and present your projects and programs.
I think it sounded good, Raquel. Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me to share with your community. And I apologize to all of you that I can't speak Portuguese to be able to do this in your language. But I'm grateful to Raquel for providing me with translations. The Portuguese that you'll see on the captions in the pictures I will show you was Raquel's work. I sent her the English and asked her to help me with the Portuguese. So should we begin, Raquel, with the pictures, with the slideshow? Okay, I'm going to...
Please, and I will be here even if you want people to understand something.
Yeah, I think, should I speak and stop for you to translate, or do the people who are listening know English?
Yes, we hope so. We advise that it will be in English.
Okay. Okay.
Feel at home.
Okay, then I will just speak the way I speak, and we'll begin sharing the screen. I am involved in this project, as Raquel said, of making a Torah scroll involving the participation of lots and lots of different community members and helpers in the various stages of the process. And this is what I'll take you through. But I'm going to begin with, now let's see if I can, how do I change the slide? I think I may have to stop the share for a moment. I'm not sure why this isn't letting me switch slides easily, but oh, I'm sorry, having a problem here. Let's see, if I do it like this, then I think maybe I can move through the slides. Let's try it like this. Okay. So this is a presentation as part of a series on women and women doing different roles within our Jewish communal life. And lots of people think that the idea of women being scribes is an innovation of the 21st century. And it is, and it isn't. So in the 21st century, for the first time, we had men like the man you see on this screen with me. This is Rabino Eric Ray, who was my teacher. And he is also the author of a children's book in English, Sefer, the story of a Torah scroll, which I have that picture of his book. And in the early 21st century, in 2003, I met him and he agreed to take me on as his student, along with another woman who is today a scribe, Linda Cobbleson, a friend of mine. Both of us studied with Eric. And up until that point, there was no woman known to history that had ever written the Torah scroll. But that doesn't mean that no woman ever did it. It just means we don't know about them. So there was a group of women. Raquel, down in Brazil, was one of these women in the very early 20th century that were looking around trying to find men who would teach us what only men had learned and what women needed to find men who would share with them. And so 15 years ago, in April of 2006, there was what we jokingly called the First World Gathering of Sofrot, Primeiro Encontro Internacional Sofrot. There was, at that time, 4 women gathered. That's my kitchen, my house in Saratoga Springs, New York. And at that time, we were aware in the entire world, there were only 4 women that we had in my kitchen. Plus, we knew about this woman named Raquel Reichardt down in Brazil. We knew about her, and we knew there was another woman named Shoshana Guggenheim in Israel. She's now in the United States, but then she was in Israel. And the 6 of us, as far as we knew, were the only women in the world that were studying to learn how to become Torah scribes. The bottom of this slide, you see a picture of Jen Friedman, who is the first woman known to history to have written a Torah scroll. And Jen always says the first woman known to history because there are these hints that women may have written Torah scrolls earlier than this. I have a whole other lecture that I do about the history of women writing sacred texts, and I'm not going to go into all of that here other than to say that there may have been women that we don't know about that did work like this, although from the time of the Talmud, the way Jewish law developed from the Talmud on was to say that women could not do this work. And women still could do other things that involved Hebrew calligraphy. Women could write ketubot, Jewish marriage licenses. Women in the Middle Ages, we know we have examples of Megillah Esther, signed by women, written by women. But 3 things, Torah, mezuzah, Sefer Torah, tefillin, mezuzah, stam, samech for Sefer Torah, tav for tefillin, mem for mezuzah. When people talk about a Sefer stam, the stam means Sefer Torah, tefillin, mezuzah. Those things women from the Talmud on were prohibited from doing. And Jen is the first woman we know known in history who has done that at least since Talmudic times. And 9th of September 2007 was the celebration of the completion of this Torah scroll. And in that picture at the bottom here, can you see my arrow? I don't know, Raquel, can you see my arrow?
Yes, we can see.
So
yeah.
This is Jen, and this is Linda Coppelson and me. And the 2 of us were the 2 women that studied with my teacher, Rabino Eric Ray. So now, with the passage of time, we have this next generation of women. And these are women now that are being taught by women. Jen Taylor Friedman, in particular, as the first woman to write a Torah scroll, really took it upon herself to want to train other women to do this. And now there's a whole generation of women, unlike Raquel and Jen and me, who have learned from women, who were from that first generation that learned from this tiny handful of men like my teacher that were willing to break with tradition and teach us. I met Raquel in October 2015 in Woodstock, New York. There I am. There's Raquel. And we had this gathering of women scribes in Woodstock, New York. Here's Jen. And we were doing presentations to teach others and also to teach ourselves. And here I am And here is Raquel. And this is a making parchment workshop that Raquel did as part of that few days that we were together in Woodstock. We now also have, and that's what's over here, is this, there's now a website called Stam Scribes. So let's move now on to the next pictures where I'm going to actually take you through what's involved in the making of a Torah scroll, because most of us know about the writing, but not all the other steps. So I began what I called the Community Torah Project because I was a woman and because I wanted to write a Torah, and because back in 2003, 2004, 2005, when I was beginning, the only way for a woman to get kosher materials was either to make them herself or to go to a scribal shop that would, I'm sorry for that background noise. I'm going to turn off my phone. That was my cell phone. I apologize.
If you have to answer, I can.
No. I'm turning it off. I shouldn't have had it on. There was no way for a woman to get kosher parchment and ink and all the materials needed. You either had to make it yourself or have somebody else, a man, go and buy materials for you from a kosher supply shop. And I decided that I didn't want to deceive or lie to anybody who wouldn't want to sell materials to me. And I also wanted to learn how to do things. So this is a picture of me stirring a hide. I'm going to show more pictures. Over here, by the way, is what happens to animal skins that I can't use for the Torah or scraps that are left over. In this case, this line is what was cut off to make a rectangle for a Torah scroll. And this was the leftover jagged edge that I used to make this art piece. I get animal skins from hunters. I live near the Adirondack Mountains of New York, and there is hunting of deer, veados, and that's the animal that I am using to make the Torah I'm writing, because that is the animal whose skins I can get easily from hunters in the area where I live. So I get skins from hunters that bring them to me, and then there are many steps. I'll just show you pictures. Everybody in these pictures are people who have volunteered their time to help me in the different stages of making parchment. So when I get the animal skin, the first thing I need to do is remove the blood and the meat from the inside of the skin. And then it needs to soak in a watery mixture that will loosen the hair. And then we remove the hair from the skins. And then the skins get rinsed. And then they get attached to a frame, like in the picture you saw. Raquel did that with me in Woodstock, New York. And the frames that I have were built with the help of volunteers in my community. And here's some pictures of the making of the frames and stringing up all of the different metal pieces and the ropes that have to go with the frame. I had a group of people come over to my house and spend an afternoon, several hours, tying all the knots and building the frames. The hides then get stretched and scraped. And all these different pictures were taken at different times when I've made parchment. I do a lot of it at my home in my backyard. Sometimes I travel and do educational programs as part of Pani Torah, Bread and Torah, the teaching that I do that Raquel mentioned with my husband. Once the hide has been stretched on the frame and dried, it then gets sanded. Licher. It gets sanded several times. You can see in these pictures, I own different sanders. This is a heavy grit sander. The first stage of sanding is just to make the hide thin. And then I have a medium grit sander to make it smoother. And then I have a final finishing sander to make the surface like paper for writing on. And each of these stages of sanding, after the first stage, this is the stage where the hide goes from being very thick like leather to becoming thinner like paper. And so after that first stage, the hide gets taken off the frame, re-soaked in water, and then stretched on the frame again because it can stretch more once it's become thin. And then it gets dried and sanded again. So then once it's finally sanded and it's smooth and it's like paper rather than like an animal skin thickness, then it gets cut out of the frame and it gets measured into the rectangles that will be the panels of the Torah. And I have this grid here that has there's different designs of Torahs. Some Torahs have 42 rows, some have 65 rows. There's little Torahs, there's big Torahs. The Torah that I'm writing is 42 rows in each column. So I have this guideline to measure out 42 rows, and that gets scraped into the hide with a sharp tool, which is what's happening in this picture. So that's the parchment. And then once you have the parchment, now let's look at what you use to write on the parchment. And this is just another example of an art piece that I used to make with a leftover scrap of parchment. I put it in this slide because the things we use to write all either come from plants or from animals. So in ancient times, scribes wrote using reeds, using plants. And the most common types of plants that were used in the ancient Near East and ancient Israel was papyrus or bamboo, because they grow in the area around Eretz Israel. Where I live in North America, Phragmites, I don't know how to pronounce calico.
Caniço.
Caniço is another type of junco that grows and is very readily available. And you can see here what, this is bamboo. I think this is, this may be papyrus, or these may all be bamboo. This is what it looks like when you've cut the tips and dipped it in black ink and used them to write. I have used these for art projects, but this is not what I use for writing the Sefer Torah. These days, most scribes, I think, Raquel, you can tell me if you have a different sense, but I think these days most scribes write with feathers, not with reeds. And I get my feathers from local farmers near where I live. There is an American holiday called Thanksgiving that happens every November. And the traditional food to eat for Thanksgiving, if you're not a vegetarian like me, I don't eat meat, but for those who eat meat, the traditional food to eat for Thanksgiving is turkey meat. And I know farmers in my area that grow turkeys to sell them for people every November for Thanksgiving. And so here's two farmers. Eric is this man's name, and this is Joe, and both of them grow turkeys and have told me that I can come in November when they are harvesting their turkeys and gather the feathers. So that's a picture of, that's a picture of me a long time ago, many years ago. I didn't have as much gray hair then, gathering feathers. And you can see back in the background, here's a little bucket with some red. That's the blood. That's where they're killing the turkeys for Thanksgiving. So turkey feathers have a tip that you can't write with. You need to take the feather and cut and shape the tip. And the way you cut the feather depends on the style of writing you're doing, and the size of the feather you use will shape the size of the letters you can write. With big feathers, you can write bigger letters. If the width of the shaft of the feather determines, and these are feathers I have written with, and you can see that I have added these pieces of fabric with rubber bands to make a grip, to make it more comfortable for me to hold the feather when I'm writing for a long time. So then you have what you write with, but you need ink. And there's many different recipes for making ink. And I'm just going to show you sort of one recipe that has 4 ingredients. That's a pretty simple recipe. The 4 ingredients are what's called in Hebrew afotzim, and in English, they're called gallnuts. I don't even know if they exist in Brazil. I don't know what the name would be, afotzim, but they are.
I searched a little bit, and it seems to be bugalho, but bugalho, it's a word that we don't use it a lot here, but it is bugalho. Yeah.
Okay. So this is what happens when a insect lays its eggs inside burrows a hole, creates a hole inside a branch of a tree, and then the tree is irritated by these insect eggs and starts coating them with cells and creates this nut that is good for the tree because it protects the tree from the insect eggs, and it's good for the insect because it protects the baby eggs. All of these afotzim that have holes in them, those holes were not drilled by a human. Those holes were when the baby insect hatches inside and eats its way out and leaves a hole. And these holes then, the afotzim are used because they have gallutanic acid. And the gallutanic acid, if you take the afotzim and you put them together in Mayim Chayim, which is living waters, water from a natural source. I didn't take this picture, but this one down here is a friend of mine gathering freshly fallen snow, which we melted and we used to boil the afotzim. If you boil the afotzim, then you have water that has gallutanic acid. And if you strain the water to get the bits of afotzim out, you just have water with gallutanic acid. The 3rd ingredient for this recipe is iron sulfate. And this is iron sulfate powder that is being put into the gallutanic acid water right at the moment as that the powder falls in, it instantly turns the water black. And you can see here, this water's still a little bit brown because the powder is falling in, and as it's falling in, it's turning the water black. And part of this water has already turned black and part's still a little bit brown, but it happens immediately. The 4th ingredient is gum arabic, Goma arabica. This gum arabic is the sap of acacia trees. If you drill a hole into an acacia tree, the sap oozes, leaks out of the acacia tree and dries in these hard rocks, crystals on the side of the acacia tree. The hard rocks look like this, and then they can be crushed into a form that's like small rocks and then made into a fine powder. That fine powder, if you add that to the black water, makes it thick. And that's what changes it from the texture of black water to the texture of ink. So I made lots of ink recipes, but I have to confess that for the Torah I'm writing, I'm not using the ink I made, because professional ink that you can buy, and here's one of the bottles of professional ink that I have bought. Now, these days, scribe supply shops will sell to women. They didn't back when I was starting, but they do now. And I can buy much better ink than I can make. So I am not making ink anymore. I'm using ink like this. But it was kind of nice to have the experience of knowing where ink comes from and how to make it. So then there's lots of different rituals around preparing to write. And these are more minhag, custom, not halacha. So not Jewish law. Not every scribe does all of these different practices. One of the practices when preparing to write, in order to test your ink and test your quill and test your writing, is to write out the word Amalek and then cross it out saying, Amalek, blot out the memory of Amalek under heaven. Raquel, is this something that you do when you begin to write?
I didn't in the beginning, but now I do in order to feel better the quill. So
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
I feel that it's I feel more confident. When I wrote just mezuzot, I didn't, but now I'm writing sefer. I feel more confident if I do.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm doing it. I'm like,
Yeah. Yeah. And do you want to explain a little bit about Amalek and blotting out Amalek?
No, you go.
Okay. So
You go. It's a, from the score. Um, no, go for it.
okay. Okay. So in the Torah, in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 25, verses 17 through 19, we're told that we should remember Amalek. Remember what Amalek did, how Amalek attacked right after we were slaves, just left Egypt, before we even arrived at Mount Sinai, before we even received the Torah. The tribe of Amalek came and attacked. And in Deuteronomy, it says that Amalek attacked the stragglers, the weakest, the most vulnerable, who couldn't defend themselves. And we're told in Deuteronomy that we should remember what Amalek did. And when we are safe in our land, blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. And so it's usually understood not in a literal way, that what we should do is blot out this type of evil that human beings would do to attack those who are vulnerable, defenseless. But in a literal way, scribes actually have this custom of writing the name Amalek to practice their quill, as Raquel just said, to test the quill, make sure it's sharp. There's different strokes that you have to do when you write the letters of Amalek. You have to put in a few crowns, you have to do some curves, you have to do some boxes. It sort of tests all the different shapes that you will need to do when you're writing. So there's this minhag, this custom that you write Amalek, and then you say these words from Deuteronomy. Blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven, and you make an X, and you cross out the name. So that's a picture of me doing that. And over here is a picture of a scrap of parchment I have with lots of Amaleks written one after another, written out day after day, each morning when I sat down to write. And I started getting the idea after several years of doing this that maybe I should actually incorporate these crossed out Amaleks into art pieces. So here's an example of, two different examples of a couple different art pieces that I actually have as part of the art piece, of lots and lots of little crossed out Amaleks. Another scribal practice that's minhag, not every scribe does this, is the practice of going to mikveh before writing names of God. And there are several different sacred names that require a special statement, a declaration of sanctification, and that is halakha, to make a statement of sanctification before writing each of these names. And some scribes have the practice before they write names of also going to mikveh. Where I live in northern New York, I live in a small town. There's not a large Jewish community. The nearest community mikveh is, for me to drive there and back, is an hour and a half drive. So I have gone there sometimes. That's where I go when I'm bringing a ger, a convert, somebody who's going to mikveh to convert. But I don't go there when I'm writing names, because it takes too much time to drive an hour and a half in order to be able to write names. Where I live, there's lots of natural ponds and rivers and streams. And so I have lots of outdoor mikveh places, which means that I can only go to mikveh in the summertime, because the rest of the year it's too cold. So I write all my names in the summertime. And if I'm writing a mezuzah, I only can do that in the summertime, because mezuzah, the letters all have to be written in order. And you can't write some words and leave blanks and then go back later and write them. For sefer Torah, you don't have to write every single word in order. You can write different sections in different orders. So I leave the names of God out. And then in the summertime, I go to one of my mikveh spots. And even though I'm there with a bathing suit, I get naked. I take off the bathing suit and immerse naked and I take off the bathing suit and put it on when I'm in the water. My husband comes with me. I hand him the bathing suit. He's my shomer for mikveh. Lots of scribes have a practice of prayer. Many scribes, because many scribes have a practice of tefillin, especially because the way, as I mentioned earlier, the way the law in the Talmud developed to say women couldn't be scribes was by making a connection between those who wear tefillin are those who can be scribes. And this connection was made because of the passage from Deuteronomy chapter 4 that we're familiar with, that comes right after Shema. It says there, Ukshartam leot ayadecha v'hayu letotafot beinenecha. This is the passage that talks about tefillin. Tie them on your arm, have them for remembrance between your eyes. Uchtavtam al mezuzot beitecha, and write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. So the Talmud understood that tying them on your arm and writing them on the doorposts were related activities in the thinking of the Talmud, and the same people who put on tefillin are the same people who write, which means men, because women weren't putting on tefillin. And although there are some examples of women who did, even that's not so clear. So now female scribes today, knowing that there was this connection with the way that Jewish law developed, linking the wearing of tefillin and fulfilling the mitzvah of putting on tefillin with being a scribe. Some women, scribes today, have a tefillin practice and put on tefillin, and some don't. It's really a personal decision. I found that I like to pray before I start scribing, although my practice has changed over the years. Because I also began developing a yoga practice. I decided as I got older that my body needed to stretch in the morning, and that helped me wake up. And so I started doing my prayers while I stretch. And now I daven while I stretch, and that's become part of my preparing to scribe practice. I mentioned earlier declarations of sanctification. A Torah scroll, as part of halakha, this is not minhag, it's not custom, it's halakha, needs to have certain declarations of sanctification statements that are said out loud, made at certain steps, or the process isn't kosher. And over here is my hides, my bin for soaking hides. And on top of it is written the words for the statement of sanctification, that I am soaking these hides for the sake of the holiness of a Torah scroll. And I have that written there so I won't forget to say that when I put the hides into soak, because if you forget to say it then, the parchment will not be kosher. You can't go back later and say the words. They have to be said at this moment. There's also, as I mentioned earlier, statements of sanctification you need to say when you begin to write a Torah scroll for the very first time, before you write each name of God. When you're scoring the lines, as you saw in that picture, to make the lines on your parchment. Also, when you begin to sew the panels together. And I like to include some sort of statement of sanctification at lots of different stages of the process, that it's not required, but it's also a way of reminding us that what we're doing is holy work. And because it's not a bracha, because you don't say, Baruch atah Hashem, there isn't the issue of bracha levatela, of not saying the blessing that you shouldn't say, because this is just a statement. The statement of sanctification says, here I am, or here we are, and then you name the act, sewing these panels, or soaking these skins, or scoring the lines, or writing the names of God for the sake of the holiness of the Torah, or when you're writing names for the sake of the holiness of the name. It's a way of reminding us that the work we're doing is for a holy purpose. So now, once you have your parchment, and you have your ink, and you have your quills, and you have the preparation, then you can write. And so here's a couple pictures of me writing. And when the panel is written, then it needs to be checked. And for my community Torah project, I've been having people do the checking because that's another way people can be involved in this process, even though today there now are computer programs where a computer can check your writing. This is very new within the last, maybe 2 decades or so that these programs have been developed, a 21st century innovation, computer checking of Torah scrolls. But before that, Torah scrolls were checked by people. And my scroll still is being checked by people because this is a way that lots of different people can participate and be involved in this community Torah project. And here you see pictures of different times where people have proofread panels. Every single panel of mine is getting checked 3 times by 3 different pairs of proofreading. The proofreading's done in pairs. One person is looking at what I wrote. The other person has a copy of not what I wrote, but from a tikkun of the way it should look. And they say letter by letter by letter, aleph. I see an aleph, and the person with the tikkun says, yes, the next letter is aleph. That is shin and a shin and a bet and a bet. And they go back and forth to make sure every letter's there. And the person who's looking at what I wrote has instructions of the details for each letter that they need to check for, like crowns on the letter shin, and that the letters shouldn't be touching each other, and those sorts of details. And every panel has to get proofread 3 times because proofreaders make mistakes. Scribes make mistakes writing, and proofreaders make mistakes and miss things. So I have had most of the mistakes I found the first time, but I've had mistakes caught the second time. And even once, it's only happened once, but even once, somebody found a missing letter yud, the tiniest letter, it's easy to skip, on the 3rd proofread. 2 other proofreaders, I missed writing it. 2 other proofreaders missed seeing it. And it was a 3rd proofreader that actually caught that there was a missing yud. So it's really important, these 3 proofreads. And everybody always asks, so what happens when somebody catches a mistake? So mistakes have to be corrected. And this is how they are corrected. I'm going to show you here. This piece of paper is the piece of paper from the tikkun, so it shows the way it should look. And here's a line that I wrote, and all of what I wrote looks good until you get to this word, levet, lamed, bet, yud, taf, and you can see I wrote lamed, yud, taf. Can you see this, Raquel? Can you see this? So I left out a letter. I left out the letter.
I see. I'm crying. Yeah.
Yeah, I left that letter back. And I didn't even know. Usually when I miss a letter, I realize my mistake immediately. Most of the mistakes I make, the proofreaders never see because I immediately see it and I say, oh no, I need to correct that. When you make a mistake, you have to wait for the ink to dry. Unlike writing on paper where the ink soaks all the way through the paper, when you write on parchment, it dries on the surface of the parchment. So if you make a mistake, you can just wait for it to dry, and then this is what you do. So here, because I missed a letter and I needed room to put in that letter, that meant I needed to remove all of the rest of the letters to the end of the line and rewrite all the rest so that I could have room to put in a missing letter in this word right here. So I have a special tool that has a sharp glass point that I can use with the glass for scraping. So I scrape at the ink. And then I use a little bit of sandpaper to rub away the ink. And I have an electric eraser that I use to erase the smudges. And then that's what it looks like when it's all cleaned up. And I have now removed all of those letters. And then I rewrite. And that's what that same line looks like after I rewrote it. And now the letter bet is in there and all the rest of the line is written. And if you're lucky, you can actually erase and clear away so that there's only the tiniest little bit of a smudge that you don't really see. Sometimes there's more ink and it's hard to get all the ink away and it leaves a little darker smudge that looks more like this picture, a little more smeary. But in this case, really, it's hard to see that there was a correction. That's how you correct mistakes. So the Atzei Chaim are the Torah rollers. And for the Sefer Torah that I'm writing, I have a member of my community, this man, Dan Chernoff is his name, who decided to make, since my Torah is being made from local deer, he decided to make for me the rollers from local wood. So this is all Adirondack mountain wood that he gathered, and he made these lovely Atzei Chaim. The Torah is not yet sewn onto the Atzei Chaim. I have them, but the Torah is not yet finished. So right now, I do have several panels of the Torah that have been proofread 3 times and are ready now to be sewn together. And this is what's used for sewing together is animal sinew, tendon, or it's called gidden in Hebrew. This is what dried sinew looks like, and this is what it looks like when it's been crumpled and crackled, and this is what it looks like when you can now tear pieces off to make string, and this is what professionally made sinew looks like, and this is what we really use. Initially, I thought I was going to get sinew from hunters. I was going to even make my own gidden, and then after a while, I thought, now that I can buy materials, now that women can buy materials from scribal supply shops, I don't need to make my own gidden. So I'm not. I'm using this lovely material that I don't have to do all this to get this lovely stuff that I can sew with. And here are some pictures from lining up the 2 panels of parchment and folding the side and sewing together. This was a group of students at Skidmore College, which is located in the town where I live. And they were the very first group. They sewed together. You can tell this is the first 2 panels of the Torah because this is the only panel that has a blank column right at the very beginning. At the very beginning of a Torah scroll, Sefer Breshit, there's a blank column so that you have space to sew without writing onto the Torah roller, the Eitz Chaim. There will be another panel at the end of the Torah that will look like this, except it will have a blank column on the other side for sewing onto the ending roller. Since then, more panels have been sewn on by different groups of people. And here's pictures taken. I think I now have about the first 10 panels sewn together. This picture was taken when the 4th one was sewn on. Here was the 3rd, the 4th. I think this was around panel 5 or 6. And the project continues. And up to today, there have now been more than 3,750 persons whose names have been listed, every single person who has helped with this project. I have records, I have books. I asked them to sign one of my books. Sometimes they write comments about their participation, and I've kept records of every single person and what they have done, and had the opportunity to travel and bring this project to different places and give people the opportunity to say, I was part of the making of a Torah scroll. And I've now had the opportunity to do presentations or programs in not only the United States, but the last one I did right before COVID stopped travel was in South Africa in December of 2019. Before that, my friend, a scribe in New Zealand, had us come to New Zealand. Maybe someday I'll be able to come in person to Brazil. I would love to come and do something in person with all of you. But at least now, virtually, I could say I've also had this wonderful opportunity to be with you and to share all of what I've learned with all of you. Next time that I share, I hope that maybe I can bring some panels of the Torah and we can have a sewing workshop in Brazil, and you can become part of the process of making the Torah. But thank you so much, Raquel, for inviting me. I'm happy now if there's questions to answer any questions, but that's the end of the pictures I prepared to show.
Wow. It's so nice. And people here in the chat, it's saying that it looks perfect. The Torah, they are enjoying so much to see and to hear from your project, that they're so beautiful, the projects. They are thanking you, the honor to participate from this live. They're saying that amazing things. But from now we have some questions. The first of one, I myself have a lot of questions. Yeah. It's not that I know everything about it. I do have some.
Yeah, no, we're all learning. I'm still learning.
Yeah, but the first one is why the Torah cannot be written in paper nowadays.
You know, It's a good question. I could say that animal skins are very durable. And I think that that's why, in ancient times, the two main materials that people used for writing were papyrus or animal skins. And for Torahs, animal skins were, one reason why they are on animal skins is because it's a better product. It lasts much longer than papyrus. An animal skin the biggest thing that will destroy an animal skin is water, is moisture. But if you're in a dry place like Eretz Yisrael, an animal skin can last forever. Think about the Dead Sea Scrolls that were found in the driest place on earth, right near the Dead Sea. There's no humidity. Those scrolls are 2,000 years old, and they were preserved because animal skin is very durable. It's hard to destroy animal skin. You can't tear it. You can't, even though it will burn, you can't burn it easily. If I lit a match and held it to a piece of paper, the paper will instantly burn. If I lit a match and hold it to a parchment piece, the parchment will put out the match. And so it's a good material. Now, I'm a vegetarian, and I'm even gradually becoming closer to a vegan. So I understand all of the questions around using animal skins because, in fact, people always ask me, how can you do this work when you're a vegetarian? You're almost a vegan. How can you handle animal skins and do this? And I understand and appreciate that I am part of a tradition I have inherited and that I didn't create. And that if I want to be part of this tradition, I feel like, for me as a woman scribe, I am breaking enough with tradition by being a woman doing this work that I don't want to do other breaks with tradition. That I don't feel I'm the one who can say, I'm not going to do animal skin. Also, I happen to think animal skin is a really good product. And I happen to think it's kind of an interesting process to work with animal skins. So I'm not going to be the person who's going to end the use of animal skins. I know that a Torah written on paper would not last nearly as long as a Torah written on animal skins because there's so many things that can ruin paper. You can crumple it up. You can soak it in water. You can burn it in a fire. You can tear it. You can't damage animal skins in so many ways. As a vegetarian, almost vegan, I appreciate this impulse that says, but do our sacred texts have to be written on the skins of other living creatures that were killed? And I will say for myself, who I'm getting these creatures that were killed from hunters who killed them, I myself wouldn't kill an animal. But I do recognize that our tradition gives permission for those who crave meat to eat meat. Our tradition does not insist that everyone has to be a vegetarian. Our tradition does insist that if we're going to eat meat, we have to eat it in an ethical way. We have to only eat certain animals. We have to be concerned about how they're killed. You can't have kosher meat that was killed by a hunter, by the way, which is also interesting. You can have kosher parchment that was killed by a hunter, but you can't have kosher meat to eat that was killed by a hunter. But I'm aware that our tradition does give permission to take animal life, and the animals that I'm making into Torah scroll are animals that I didn't kill, but the hunters would have killed anyway. They're not killing the animals in order to give me the skin. They're killing the animal in order to have food for their family, and the skins that they have, they would throw in the garbage because they can't eat it. And these hunters, when they hear about me, actually go to a lot of extra work to contact me, to call me, to make arrangements to meet me, to bring the hide to me, to give it to me, rather than just throw it in the garbage. And they do that because they also value the life of the animal, and they don't want to have any part of it go to waste. And I feel like getting these animals, when I do all the work, it's part of the making it holy. Like a dead animal skin being transformed through our work and our labor and our statements of sanctification into something holy is also a way of kind of, in the language of the Jewish mystics, a tikkun, a fixing of some of the harm of killing this animal. Even though it's permitted, it's still harm, but then we can also, through our labors, try to transform part of its body into something holy. So that's how I understand it and make it work for me. But I also very much appreciate this question of, in our day, in our time today, do we still have to do this to animals? Do we still have to do this?
Because the second question has to do with it. It's about most of the same. The Tiago asked about if the Sefer Torah can be written, can be made of nevela. So he is worrying about to preserve animals from the hunting market. So in a way, there is
yes.
not. So that's why I interrupted you.
Yeah. So a Torah, as I mentioned, meat isn't kosher to eat if it was killed by a hunter. But for parchment to be kosher, for meat to be kosher to eat, there's two concerns. It has to.
Sorry, I don't know if everybody know what is nevela.
So an animal that was not a dead animal that did not die from a kosher means of being killed. Mm-hmm. So for meat to be kosher for us to eat, it matters the type of animal it is. It has to be a kosher animal. So there's no way to make pig meat kosher because the pig animal isn't kosher. But the second thing is it also matters how the animal was killed. And an animal that was shot by a hunter even if it's a kosher animal, like a deer is a kosher animal, a cow is a kosher animal, a goat is a kosher animal, but if it's not killed with a kosher shoichet, a kosher shchita, a kosher method of slaughter, the meat's not kosher. For parchment, and it's kind of interesting that the halakha Jewish law developed differently for parchment. For parchment, there's two things that have to be. It has to be a kosher animal, so you'll never see a sefer Torah written on pigskin. And the second thing is not how the animal was killed. You can use an animal killed anyway. You could use nevela. It doesn't have to be kosher slaughter. But the second thing is you have to make that statement of sanctification. When you begin the process, when you put the animal to soak in the lime water, you have to make a statement of sanctification. If you don't do it, it won't be kosher parchment. And I've wondered about that. Both the halakha that defines the beginning of the process is the moment, not when the animal's killed, not when you remove the meat and the blood from the animal, but when you put it in the water, the lime mixture that loosens the skin so that you can then, after it's loosened, remove the skin. That's the moment when you have to make the statement of sanctification. And I used to think, well, maybe that's the moment because that's where the Jewish process begins, because maybe the skins that were used for Sefer Torah didn't come from Jews. Maybe they came from hunters, maybe they came from non-kosher slaughter, and maybe it was, the Jews were getting these hides and then beginning the Jewish process when they were starting to soak them. I had somebody else suggest to me, and I don't know the answer, that perhaps we say the statement of sanctification to define that as the beginning of kosher parchment, because that's the moment when the first transformation of the material itself occurs. A chemical transformation happens in the hide to loosen the hair. There's no chemical transformation that's happening when you're just scraping away the meat and the blood from the skin of the animal. So perhaps halakha defined the beginning of the process for the sake of sanctifying the process when the first transformation occurs. But, the question about not wanting to get meat from an animal that's been hunted and killed because of ethical concerns is a very interesting question. Where I live, getting meat from a hunter that killed the animal is actually more ethical meat than getting meat from a factory farm. Because the factory farms are raising animals in horrible conditions. And so unless you can get your animal skin from there do exist kosher farms where they're raising meat and the meat is ethically raised and the animals are grazing on farmland and they have a happy life. And it's not till the end of their life when a shoichet is brought to the happy farm and kills the animal. And now you have a happy animal that died a happy death and now you have a happy kosher skin. That would be great. That would be great. I don't have a means of getting enough skins from that way. I can get lots of skins from hunters in the Adirondack Mountains of New York, and those animals have a good life in the Adirondack Mountains until the moment when the hunter kills them. And that's actually more ethical, I think, than the animals that are kept in these concentrated animal feedlots until the moment of slaughter where they don't have a happy life their entire life long. So the ethics about where the skins of the animal's life and where it comes from are very profound. And perhaps in Brazil, it's different. Perhaps in Brazil, it's possible to get animal skins from kosher slaughter where the animals are also raised ethically. I don't know about that in Brazil.
We don't. So the skin here, the parchment I can get, it's from Argentina. So the slaughtery here, we do have kosher that we export to Israel but I don't have the skin here. It's very, very hard for me. I buy also ready from everywhere, but
yeah.
The next question is the one I believe that you hear enough. It's how long does it take to finish the 5 books?
That's a really good question. So if the question is just the writing, like most scribes, professional scribes who, write, that's their job. That's what they do every day, all day, except obviously Shabbos and holidays, you don't write. A scribe can finish a Torah if they're really good, sharp in a year. Some scribes might take a little longer, but an average of a year or a little bit longer than a year. But what I'm doing is, first of all, it's not my job. I'm a rabbi of a congregation. My job is to be a rabbi. I am only I write for an hour every morning, except Shabbos, holidays, when I can write an hour every morning, which means in a good week, there will be 4 or 5 days that I will write. I have never had a week where I've written 6 days. There's always things that come up in the life of a rabbi. But, most weeks I can write 4 or 5 days for an hour, 1 hour. So I started writing this Torah in June 2007, which means this June, I will have been working on it for 14 years. Been working on it almost 14 years. I am now, because I'm also not just writing, I'm also, making all this parchment, and that's also very time consuming. I sort of joke that, a typical scribe, if I were doing this full time, it would take me 12 to 18 months. Because of the way I'm doing it, it's going to take 12 to 18 years. And I think that that's about right. I've now been working on it. In June, it will be 14 years. And I am getting to the end of Bamidbar. So I'm almost to the end of the 4th book. 1 more book to go. Not quite at the end. I'm in Parshat Matot right now. So Matot Matzeh, and then I'll be at the end of Bamidbar. So, June will be 14 years, and I got another 4 more years to get to year 18. I am hoping I like the sound of chai, 18 years. So I'm hoping that sometime the 18th year I'll finish.
So
nobody writes in Torah scroll like that.
She said that her question was about the process of the whole process and not just about writing. So that
professional parchment makers. I have visited 2 different parchment making factories to sort of see how it's done and learn and make sure that, I'm not missing anything, that I'm doing what I should be doing. I'm doing this small scale, in my backyard, not factory. If you have a professional factory making parchment, where I have that little bin, the gray bin you saw, and I can soak 2 or 3 hides in my bin. In a professional parchment making factory, they have these huge fiberglass tanks where they could soak 60, 70 hides at once in a tank. But it's interesting because even in a professional factory where they can do lots of things that take me a long time, they can do quickly. They can soak 60 or 70 hides all at once. They have this machine that they can put the hide in, and in about 2 minutes, it will remove all the hair and all the meat that for me, I have to scrape. It takes me about an hour of scraping to remove the hair from one hide, an hour of scraping to remove the blood and the meat from one hide. It's 2 hours of work that machine can do in about 2 minutes. So there's things in the factory that they can do very fast, but even in the factories, they have the hide stretching frames. And even in the factory, every single hide has to get stretched on a frame and, dried under the tension and sanded. There isn't they use an electric sander. I use an electric sander, but there isn't any faster way than that to do those stages of the process. So, it may take me hours and hours of work, a couple of weeks to make a single skin into parchment. And for them, they might have, a time frame of 2 or 3 weeks from the beginning to the end of the process, but instead of making 1 hide in that time frame, they would make 70. So, it's a different scale.
When I'm writing, I see a lot of connection between my work as a Hebrew teacher and program of teaching bar mitzvah, preparing the young people for approaching the Torah and everything. And when I knew that you're working with your husband with the Bread and Torah project, I asking myself, how do you relate to the both of the project? Because I see when I'm writing, every letter is like one of my students. I learn from it and I care for each letter, each teva, because it's individual. It's not one letter like other letters, like every right. Student. It's not like other student. It's aleph, but it's not like other aleph.
So each one looks different, right? Each one looks different.
And it is different, and it's not the same because we have to say aloud everything. It's completely different. And I see that, yeah. It's why I'm doing that. It's like my children's and everything. And because I think that every project we do, it's connected to the other. So
yeah,
when you're doing a comunitary Torah and baking something, so you are elaborating a Torah and a project, and you're baking bread and Torah. Do you see something similar? It sounds for you something that you teaching and learning from each other together. They are related for you.
Yes. I mean, my husband's the baker and I'm the scribe, but they're, both activities. First of all, involve elaborate processes, right? And they both also have a dimension and aspect that is working individual and also aspects that are community. They also involve very elemental basic substances, whether it's skins and plants or wheat and yeast, it's things that are just very basic and very fundamental and don't depend on a lot of technology. And you can see that the way we do things now, you can understand how our ancestors did the same kind of thing, 2,000, 3,000 years ago. And they also have this sacred aspect to it, this sense that I am doing something that is a part of the work of my hands and the consciousness, the kavanah of my being, but it's also making something so much greater, than just the work of my hands and the intentions, the kavanah of my being. And that happens with, just as much with the making of bread as the scribal work. And when we do programs together, we'll go to a community, and I might do, a session like this, and we might sew together panels of a Torah, do a hide stretch, and my husband will do baking workshops, and all of the things that we do involve people using their hands and feeling these basic materials, and also involve people using their hearts and their minds and having a sense that they're involved in a sacred process. And there's also wonderful texts that we can, share and teach, like the passage from Pirkei Avot that gave us the name to our project, Im ein kemach, im Torah, im ein Torah, im kemach, where there's no bread, there's no Torah, where there's no Torah, there's no bread, and what's the relationship between spiritual sustenance and physical sustenance. And actually, we would love, Raquel, if there is some time after the pandemic when we can fly down to fly down to Rio or Sao Paulo and meet you and meet your community and do some project there. We would so love to do that. We should have to talk about that. Because
we'd love to have you both here, and it will be really, really nice. And just because of the time here, I just want to thank you and to tell you how happy and lucky and honored we are to have this talk and this learning today here. And I said lucky, but I think that I don't believe in mazal, right? Because we are now. I'm thinking that mazal, it's about makom, zman, and lif'ol, right? And doing. So space, time, and doing. So this COVID time,
Wait, Raquel, can you say that again? I love that. I have never heard that before. Mazal is makom, zman, and what was the third?
Lif'ol.
That's wonderful. Thank you for that teaching.
People say, or livchor, to choose, or doing it, liv'ol, right? Making. Yeah. And I think that one of the teachings that we have during this COVID is like we are doing this Torah that we had tonight here. Yeah. It's that we have no makom, no place. You are in California. I am in Sao Paulo. This is happening in Rio. Midrash is in Rio, and people from other places out here in the city that no time because you are the time. Right. Yeah, it's amazing, and we decided to be together and to interchange. So we choose to be here to study together. So that's our lucky, our mazal. So thank you so much. And
thank
if you want to say something,
No, I just want to thank you for inviting me. It's so wonderful to be part of this international community and to share together. And I just apologize that I don't speak Portuguese. Because I like being able to, when I present in Buenos Aires, speak Spanish, and, in Israel, not that I've ever done that in Israel, never have, but if I did, I would be in Hebrew. But, thank you for providing the translations and providing the opportunity.
You will be very, very welcome in Brazil. So now people know you, and we will be the opportunity to bring you both here.
Great.
We hope soon. Yeah,
I would love to.
Healthy and good time.
Right. Okay.
Take care. Be safe.
Be well. Thank you.
Bye. Tá boa? Ela é bonitinha, né?